Hi, welcome to another episode of the Whole Note podcast. I'm your host, Shin Kim, and I'm really excited to finally be joined by a cellist for the first time. Our guest today is principal cellist of the Indianapolis Symphony, Austin Huntington, who won the job almost 10 years ago at the ripe age of 20. Austin, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to kind of talk shop with you a little bit and pick your brain about the many facets of the cello. So Austin, you're clearly recognized as one of the foremost principal cellists, or especially of our generation today. And so we'll definitely get to that part of your life, but I want to actually talk about your life before your work with the ISO, where you were still obviously a student. And it's interesting because you actually had a lot of success, I would say, with competitions early on in your life, having won prizes at the Stulberg, Klein, and Schadt competitions.
Mhm.
At what point did you decide to pivot away from competitions and focus on taking orchestral auditions? And was the goal always to aim for principal jobs?
Sure. So I guess the last competition I did was that chat competition in Pennsylvania, and I did that my freshman year of college, I think, either freshman or sophomore. And I remember pretty soon after that one, it came the time because even before this, it was a little bit of a question of, do you go the solo route or do you go the orchestra route? Or, I mean, and in there's chamber music, but I kind of knew rather early on, fortunately for myself, that I wanted to go into orchestra music, primarily actually because of, we were talking before the recording of Mr. Leonard, but primarily because of Mr. Leonard.
Mhm.
Ron Leonard was principal cellist of the LA Phil for 24 years. And so I was incredibly fortunate to actually study with him from when I was 14 until 18 at the Perlman Music Program in Shelter Island, New York.
Mhm.
And so I remember actually speaking of competitions, the very first summer that I went to PMP, I was preparing for what I think was actually the last Rostropovich competition in
Mhm.
2009.
Mhm.
And so I was this 14-year-old kid who didn't know anything but thought he knew everything, which is a very dangerous combination for a 14-year-old cellist.
Mhm.
And so basically, I walked into it and I was just trying to play as loud and as fast as possible. And his whole thing was just like, hey, let's take a step back.
Mhm.
We don't have to play, for example, Elfintons. Like, we don't have to play that, 180. We can just do 160 and we can really wow them with phrasing. We can really wow them
Mhm.
with the articulation and everything.
Mhm.
Um, and so I remember coming out the first couple lessons just like, who is this guy? Like, who is he to tell me how to play this piece? And then fast forward a year, and I had matured significantly, thank God. And I was just like, oh, this is like one of the most inspiring experiences ever. I'm so disappointed that I wasted a year by like because I was fighting him every single opportunity I could get.
Mhm.
I mean, he admitted that he actually rather enjoyed that because it was always constantly making sure, like little things like he would be like, "Oh, we need to do this bowing." I was like, "Oh, but I prefer this bowing, and this
Mhm.
is why I prefer it." And so we had this
Mhm.
kind of open dialogue. So actually, he mentioned after I got into Colburn that
Mhm.
that was a interesting facet of teaching me. But it was one of those where after studying with him a few summers and knowing that I wanted to go to Colburn,
Mhm.
part of that was also I wanted to essentially I looked at him and wanted my life to be like that when he actually just turned 90
Wow.
this past month. And so I looked at his life, his career, and was just like, this is exactly what I want. I want to essentially, then that's kind of the perfect role models. Like,
Mhm.
is somebody who you look at everything they're doing and you can't imagine anything better than that. So, and
Mhm.
one of the things that he mentioned when I first started taking auditions was, in a lot of ways, the principal cello role is ideal if you don't know exactly what you want to do. You don't want to get kind of um, pigeonholed into one specific category
Mhm.
because, for example, let's take this season right now. I
Mhm.
obviously every week we have an orchestral perform, or almost every week. We're a 46-week orchestra, so we have 6 weeks of built-in vacation.
Mhm.
And so we have that. So orchestra playing, which is really fun. We just did like Brahms one, Tchaikovsky six, a lot of
Mhm.
also new music, some Nadia Boulanger,
Mhm.
um, and so this past week we did. And so we have that. We just did. I did chamber music. Trying to think. the schedule's so hectic. I can't actually remember the last chambers I did, but I know, for example, I'm doing quartet for the End of Time
Mm-hmm.
in a couple months, and then in March I'm doing Shostakovich Concerto with a small orchestra in Minnesota.
Oh,
And so
wow.
like every couple months you have something different, and so it's kind of the best combination. You get to play orchestra every week, but have enough projects on the side where you really have to stay in shape. But you also are allowed to explore different opportunities and really enjoy that instead of one of the big things I did the Kronberg master classes in
Mm-hmm.
2010.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking with Gary Hoffman and Franz Hummerson then, and they were essentially saying, if you want to go into soloing, you have to get really good at staying patient.
Mm-hmm.
Because A, solo careers don't happen overnight, but B, a lot of it is just like your manager will be like, okay, what two or three concertos can we program? And that's
Mm-hmm.
the only thing that you will play with
Yeah.
orchestra. So those two or three concertos.
Right.
And in order to be a successful soloist, you need to sell it to the crowd every single night.
Right.
For example, we played Shostakovich with Johannes Mozart this past summer at the Colorado Music Festival.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely fantastic. I love his playing to death.
Mm-hmm.
But he sold it so well. And I know that's a piece that, because we had actually played it with him previously, and I know that he had a recording of it. For example, the reference recording that I used when I was kind of going through that part before the rehearsal was actually him with the was it the NH Symphony Orchestra in Germany. So
Oh.
he plays it a bunch, and he
Mm-hmm.
still sells it like it's like he's excited about it. I don't know if he's actually excited about it, but so little things like that where it's just like it keeps you interested, and keeps you engaged. I guess to get back to the original question with this really long answer is essentially, I didn't always just take principal auditions though.
Mm-hmm.
The ISO was my fourth audition.
Mm-hmm.
I did in this order: principal of Detroit, section of Cleveland, section of Houston. Those two might have been, those were within like a week and a half of each other, which was an absolutely horrible idea.
Oh, wow.
Also because they were very different lists. And
Mm-hmm.
if anybody's taken the Cleveland Orchestra auditions, they ask for really random stuff.
Right.
I mean, some of the things now don't seem that random. So like, that was the first time I learned also Sprach. The first time I
Mm-hmm.
learned, it's the Mav Last, the Smetana, but it's like
Right.
not the Moldau. And
Oh,
so
right.
stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So stuff like that was just like that mixed with like Houston, which is very standardless, but also had their own things like Schubert 9 and
Mm-hmm.
Beethoven 8. So there wasn't a lot of overlap. So that's the whole thing. And then, so I took some time off after that, because I think I was a little bit burnt out on auditions.
Mm-hmm.
And then applied to ISO.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, I am also from Indianapolis, or sorry,
Mm-hmm.
not Indianapolis. I'm from Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was able to feel like there was a little bit of a hometown advantage because I had heard the ISO play before.
Right.
Um, I had played in the hall before. I had actually at that point I had also played with the ISO before in a high
Mm-hmm.
school competition.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me one sec, I have to cough. Cool. On that sorry, I'm just
No, you're
getting
good.
over being sick right now.
Oh, no.
I'm not sick right now, but
Mm-hmm.
last week I was sick, but there's
Mm-hmm.
some residual bad coughing.
Sure, sure.
But anyway, so I felt actually this was the first audition because also Mr. Leonard and I had kind of sat down and reworked how we prepared for auditions. It was the first audition that I felt prepared for, honestly,
Mm-hmm.
felt like I knew what I had to do. And luckily played the first round, and I hadn't advanced in any auditions until that point. Played the first round, and the personnel manager pulled me aside. I was just like, hey, I'm going to deliver the news in a sec. But the committee's actually voted to move you straight to the finals. I was
Oh,
like,
wow.
am I gonna wait? Where's the cameras? Like, is this a joke? So I did that, and then it was funny because obviously I living in Indiana, I did the ISO high school concerto competition, which is when I was able to play with the ISO for the
Mm-hmm.
first time when I was like 15 or so. Actually,
Mm-hmm.
ironically, with the conductor who ended up hiring me,
Oh,
Christoph.
oh, yeah.
And so basically, the screen comes down after they announced that I was awarded the trial week.
Mm-hmm.
And the former concertmaster, Zach Depew,
Mm-hmm.
who was
Mm-hmm.
on my committee as a high schooler when I was doing the high school competition, he just,
Oh, wow.
throws his arms, was like, no shit. It's one of those where it's just like,
That's so funny.
it also made me feel better because I was just like, almost, there's a bit of imposter syndrome also because like if you had an advance and you finally won an audition, won a trial, you weren't sure if you deserved it or not. And then the fact that they had no idea who was behind the screen made me a
Mhm.
lot happier because it was a truly blind audition. But
Right.
there's a
Right.
long answer for your short question.
No, that's so, and honestly, like I wish I mean, no, this would be horrifying, but they could make like a reality TV show with like the blinds coming down and like, oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, so during a particularly difficult audition one time,
Mhm,
we were joking because what I found, I mean, I've probably sat on, I want to say without exaggerating, more than 20 audition committees now, as
mhm,
well as
mhm,
still auditioning as well.
mhm,
And so there's one, it kind of goes in waves. There are some really, really fantastic rounds where if we have 8 people in a round, we might
mhm,
have 6 people advance.
mhm,
But a lot more often than not, you have rounds where it's just 0-8 vote after 0-8 vote. And so
mhm.
we were coming up with creative ways. And so we were just like, oh, what if we just like, it could be blind until we have like the voice style chairs where like you press a button and it turns around. And if everybody presses the button within a certain time, that person goes straight to the
Oh,
finals, like the golden
oh,
buzzer kind of
oh
thing.
my God.
Something tells me that wouldn't fly with the union. That sounds a little bit sketchy. But
Right.
that's what happens when you're like 45 people in and you're just like, when
Yeah,
is this ever going to end?
right.
And then you have the one savior of an audition who comes down and plays Don Juan just beautifully, and you're
Mhm.
like, we have our finalist.
Yeah.
So
Well, and
yeah.
then you guys are for the first time in a while like a full
Mm.
section now, right? Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, and I think a lot of orchestras have kind of been going through this and navigating these, let's just call them interesting post-COVID times.
Mhm,
So especially with the ISO, and a lot of orchestras have done this as well, but especially with the ISO, a lot of people were hired at the same time back
mhm,
in the 70s and 80s. So
mhm,
everybody was approaching that 65-year-old mark.
mhm,
And a lot of them, because of the substantial pay cut that we took coming
mhm,
back in 2021
mhm,
with the regressive contract, a
mhm.
lot of them actually found it more beneficial to actually retire, collect
Ah,
pension and Social Security
mhm.
than to basically lose money playing in the ISO
Ah.
and actually having to work. So
Yeah.
we had, I think, over the course of the pandemic, we had 3 or 4 people retire,
Mhm.
and then there's one who was not at the retirement age, but once we signed that regressive contract, he just walked in and said that he was done.
Mhm.
So basically, I'm the longest serving cellist now, which sounds weird to say. The second longest serving cellist is an absolute fantastic cellist
Mhm.
who also is taking a year leave of absence because she's playing the San Francisco Opera. She won a job there,
Okay.
so she's on a leave of absence right now. But
Mhm.
everybody else is really new. We hired basically 3 rounds of people,
Oh
and
wow.
we I was really happy we ended up doing this because also you never want to go through a no hire audition.
Right.
Luckily, I've never been on a committee that has no hired, so
Mhm.
I'm I don't know, knocking on wood wherever it is.
Right.
But also we have always hired for the number of spots available too, because we've always felt that for example, if we have this last audition, we had 3 positions,
Mhm.
and well, 2 and then one came up later,
Mhm.
and so we were able to hire for 3 positions.
Mhm.
Because I know some places do, they might have 3 positions, but they only feel like one person is qualified for the tenure track. Whatever,
Mhm.
for whatever reason, our auditionees, now our section members, like they were such at a high level that we felt, incredibly comfortable offering them the full-time tenure track job. So
Oh
we've been
wow.
we've been a combination of incredibly lucky that
Mhm.
everybody has kind of converged on our audition and they've all sounded really fantastic.
Right.
Um, but also it's been a little bit of an uphill battle at times as well, because now you have an entire section of people who haven't always played in an orchestra before. And
Right.
so, because
Mhm.
also as somebody who's done this many years now and also played in school orchestras absolutely do not translate to professional orchestras.
Right.
In
Right.
terms of like how to prepare, yes, you know how to prepare for an orchestral rehearsal. But in terms of, for example, preparing your body to be under the stress of playing a different concert every single week,
Mhm.
I think our general average service is about 7 to 8 services per week.
Mhm.
And so going through that, I remember my first couple of years, I had really horrible tendonitis
Oh
because I
wow.
tried to play every concert, 110%.
Right.
I also had a lot of leftover tension issues from college as well. And
Mhm.
so those have since been fixed because I learned how to play in an orchestra and how
Mhm.
to pick your battles a little bit wiser when
Right.
you actually play
Right.
with a conductor and with the section.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, just a quick side note. When you took the Cleveland audition, was Mark
Mhm.
Kossauer already the principal cellist at the time, or?
Yes,
Okay,
I think so. This
okay,
was 2014. So
okay,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I think he came in around 2011 or so, 2010,
Hmm.
2011, somewhere. Okay, that's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing all that. That's yeah. And it's funny because you mentioned the idea that you had a lot of people that were close to retirement.
Mhm.
And Austin, you won that job, like I said before, when you were 20 years old. This was like almost 9 years ago now. Is that right?
Yes, it's ninth season now. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, and it's so funny because I vividly remember because you and I think, are about the same age. So
Mhm.
I remember when you won that job that summer, and I saw that we were the same age, and I was like, oh crap, like I'm getting ready for grad school auditions, and this guy already has a job, like, which I mean, in the field of music is like unheard of, but like I feel like even if you were like doing any other major, like it's unheard of to win a job before you graduate. So like that's
Mhm.
obviously very impressive and it's great. But speaking to that, how can you talk a little bit about how that was in terms of the first couple years adjusting to professional life and leading a group of cellists that I would assume have decades more experience in the professional life,
Mhm.
and just how to navigate leading a section like that at such a young age.
Sure. So a lot of it goes back to learning from past mistakes. What I was saying about me being 14 preparing for Rostropovich.
Mm,
Um, the one fantastic quote that a number of people have mentioned in terms of actually getting a job in an orchestra,
mm,
the people who say they know everything actually know nothing, kind of thing. That kind of vibe is the vibe that I tried to hold close to my heart as
mm,
I approach this, because also I truly felt when I joined the orchestra, like I was saying, even though I was in, being principal of Colburn Orchestra,
mm,
Chicago Symphony before that,
mm,
um, it didn't feel like anything translated. And so
mm,
it felt like, how do you, because if you try to overshow,
mm.
then the section might be like, who the hell does this guy think he is? Like we know how to play on the beat kind of thing.
Mm, mm,
And so a lot of it was encouragement from other principals that had been there a long time.
sure.
I know, especially right as I joined. I mean, our principal oboe had been there for a few years at that point.
Mm,
She's one. I truly think she's one of the best principal oboists in the country.
mm,
And our principal trumpet, who also I would say is one of the best principal trumpets in the country,
mm,
who's
mm,
now doing a year co-principal with Pittsburgh.
mm,
Um, they both kind of, I know, kind of navigating this around the same time, because
mm,
I think there's been, even in their sections where it might not be as big of an age difference, I think there's a little bit of that, like, how do you tell somebody who's been here much longer than you,
mm.
we need to play better together, kind of thing.
Right,
So I
right.
think a lot of it was a very gradual change. And
Mm,
so a lot of it was finding the strengths of each individual player, in terms of
mm,
at least what section that I wanted to create, what kind of culture that I wanted to create, finding the
mm,
strengths of each individual player and personally encouraging those strengths.
mm.
For example, there might be a player, and this is not tied to any one person, this is
Sure,
just an
sure,
example.
sure.
There might be one player who might rush like crazy, but have
Mm,
the most gorgeous sound in the world. A
right.
lot of it would be, just encouraging that sound, that like I
Mm,
want us to have that sound,
mm,
while also focusing much more on really kind of marinating in that sound. That's a really bad way to describe it. Basically, just like sitting in that sound, as a way to also disencourage rushing, kind of thing.
mm,
And so
mm.
kind of getting to know each individual section player, and in a, as I said, it sounds very manipulative, but at the same time, it's kind of like crafting, but also making sure that you don't overstep as well, because there's an idea that because you're principal you can do whatever you want,
Mm,
which is absolutely not true.
mm,
You still have to behave with respect. You're still a cellist as they are cellists. The
mm,
only thing that kind of differentiates you is you have more responsibilities,
mm.
and also when it comes down to some artistic decision, you just have to make a decision.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it was the first couple of years. I have since kind of phased this out a little bit,
Mm,
but if there's a bowing that I haven't decided between during a break, I'd be like, hey, do you guys have a preference if we start on down or up,
mm,
kind of thing. And so sometimes people felt very strongly about it.
mm.
I tried that a couple times when we hired some new people, and they're like, whatever you want to do, kind of
Yeah,
thing, we can make it happen, which is
yeah.
kind of the mentality that I like, because I like a flexible section.
Sure.
Um, and so a lot of it was, over time, as the people would retire,
Mm,
I would try to keep that same sound and that same culture, which has been very difficult since COVID, because we had a year and a half of just not playing, and then we
mm.
had like four people suddenly get replaced.
Right.
Um, And so a lot of it was just deferring to people's opinions.
Mhm.
For example, I know one story that I really like to tell is an Indiana Jones Pops concert. I looked at the part and I saw the bowing that was on there. I was like, ah, we can do a much better bowing than this. So I
Right.
changed all the parts. I thought I was being a very good principal. I didn't even
Mhm.
like present it because what the library can do is if you are like, hey, I have this page or this piece that I want to change all the bowings in,
Mhm.
and you give them enough time, they're like, yeah, we can change them in the parts for you. But I was
Mhm.
being a good citizen. It was like, no, I'll change them in the parts. So we get to the first rehearsal, and right before the downbeats, right before the tuning starts,
Mhm.
I hear one of my very, very good friends say from the back of the orchestra, "Who the hell changed these bowings?" And like I was terrified because I was like,
Mhm.
"That's me." Um, but her point was like they had been playing this since like however whenever the original Indiana Jones came out in like the 80s or the 90s. They'd been
Mhm.
playing it. This was the original sheet music from when they got it gifted by John Williams because they
Oh
had an
wow.
arrangement where they proofread a lot of the parts. So like for example, ET's the suite that you hear a lot of times orchestras play with ET.
Mhm.
The ISO actually proofed that right
Mhm.
when it came out before it was put for release, and they got a free set of parts as a thank you.
Oh
Um,
wow.
so for I think a lot of that has to do with our pops conductor Jack Everly is an incredibly sweet and gracious and amazingly talented pops conductor, and he's uh, rather close with John Williams and John Williams'
Mhm.
team. So he was able to pull some strings on that kind of stuff, and
Mhm.
John Williams trusts us enough to do that kind of stuff. But
Mhm.
yeah, I guess to stop going on tangents, the main thing would the main thing essentially would be um, having a foresight or a clarity of thought to
Mhm.
know and to be confident when you have a reason to be confident. If you feel strongly about something, be confident,
Mhm.
don't back down.
Mhm.
Obviously, be respectful and be polite.
Yeah.
But a lot of times it was just a matter of learning from the experiences that people have had. Because the thing is, everybody has made certain mistakes. Everybody's had that thing where, let's say a colleague has played really out of tune, and
Mhm.
then you go up to them and you actually mention directly intonation, just like, "Hey, we need to play better in tune," kind of, or
Mhm.
like I think the word I used when I was 20 was like, "Hey, I think you're just a little bit flat here.
Mhm.
Try to bring it up," kind of thing,
Mhm.
which is might not sound like a bad thing to say,
Right.
but if you have somebody come to you like, "Hey, you're flat," it all is like you're flat. You feel like people can easily be attacked
Right. Right.
that way, and so a lot of it is like I just get the sections and go, hey, I don't think we're really matching intonation here on
Mhm.
this E flat. Let's make sure to constantly be adjusting. Let's listen to the
Mhm.
horns, and even if
Right.
they're a little bit sharp, let's make sure to just adjust a little bit up to that kind of thing. So it's all
Right.
about we versus telling them what to do, and I think that's kind of more of the what I've learned with playing with a lot of the more senior members of the cello
Mhm.
section when I first joined. It's just like this is a group thing. This is not
Mhm.
me telling people what to do,
Yeah.
basically.
No, and I think, I mean, from afar, because I see your social media posts.
Mhm.
It seems like you've done a really good job of that recently, especially because I know that you guys play a lot of cello ensemble music with the whole
Mhm.
section, and I
Yeah.
mean, I'm sure that's made a little bit easier considering how everyone's a little bit younger or like around the same
Mhm.
age, so it makes it easier to create that kind of harmony and schedule. So no, I think you're
Yeah.
doing a really good job of that, and that's
Oh,
really
thank you.
that's fantastic. Yeah, because I mean, I'm trying to think. Aside from like Berlin, I don't think a lot of orchestras do like cello ensemble stuff, as far as I
A lot
can.
of them do like one-offs. Like I know, talking with Rayner, the new principal of San Francisco,
Mhm.
we were talking about Utah, and
Mhm.
it just came up that Utah did a cello ensemble concert right as we were programming our cello ensemble concert. So
Oh.
we were able to steal some ideas from there, and they sounded
Mhm.
fantastic too.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, no, it does absolutely help the
Yeah.
camaraderie. It
Right.
also helps because let's say you play Brahms' Second Symphony, Second Movement in an actual orchestra.
Right.
It's hard unless the conductor, which I found the conductor actually, they're usually very generous with their time in terms of fixing stuff with this.
Mhm. Mhm.
But it's a lot better if we play, for example, we played Foray Pavane and
Mhm.
Charlie Chaplin's Smile,
Mhm.
which might not seem like there's so much of Brahms too, but a lot of the phrasing ideas, a lot of the kind of sound structures that we want in Brahms too
Mhm.
are in those pieces, and we can much kind of work on them in a much deeper sense rather than just kind of hoping that the conductor fixes it. Because also during rehearsal, I can make little comments like I can be like, "Hey, let's make sure we phrase to here,"
Mhm.
or "Let's follow this articulation," little things like that.
Mhm.
But playing in a cello ensemble lets us actually work, and also people in the section can make suggestions as well,
Right.
because there is still a little bit of a power dynamic that needs to be respected. Like
Mhm.
I can make authoritative decisions,
Mhm.
um, and people will follow them, which is
Mhm.
I am very happy they will.
Mhm.
No mutinies yet, and so. But then, as it goes down, the title shares associate can make those, and assistant can make those in kind of, I guess, in that order. But technically, being a principal, I can still technically veto that, even though I don't think I've really vetoed anything in the
Mhm.
channel level like
Mhm.
that. But if you're a section player, it has to be a much kind of thinner ice to walk on. But
Mhm.
it's still very much encouraged. But
Mhm.
again, even more so, for example, we have a lot of young cellists, and I kind of saying that story about like talking about us, we,
Mhm.
that idea.
Right.
There were a couple of people who I was in the room when they made that mistake that I made as well, saying like, "Hey, I think you're accenting this part," and I was just
Mhm.
like, this is a teachable moment because I made this exact same mistake, and I felt absolutely terribly for doing that once I realized what I was doing.
Mhm.
So, and I think it's also a matter of it's not my responsibility, and these people can grow by themselves just fine.
Mhm.
But it's really fulfilling to see the section grow and to help encourage that as well,
Right.
because there's kind of a golden uh, how to put it. There's a sweet spot in terms of you want the section to be athletic and to be technically incredibly sound, but
Mhm.
you want them to have a lot of experience where you don't have to worry about little basic things like rushing or
Right.
dragging or making a harsh sound or anything like that.
Mhm.
um, but you also don't want to go past that spectrum,
Mhm.
which right now I think that because also once we get past that spectrum, we'll have the same problem that the ISO did recently, where everybody retires at the same time, as long as
Mhm.
everybody stays in the orchestra, because they're all, I would say, besides one member, we're all within like 4 or 5 years of each other.
Oh
So
wow. Mm.
it makes it'll be tricky in the 2050s maybe.
There'll be like seven new auditions like, or jobs opening up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's so funny. Yeah. And so, kind of diving a little bit deeper into your work as principal cellist of a major orchestra, can you talk to us a little bit about what a typical week of preparation looks like for any given particular program? And yeah, more specifically, what is your practice regimen like when you're not preparing for an audition?
Sure. So right now is a good example because we just finished our last classical concert of the first part of the season.
Mhm.
Because we do an entire month of what's called Yuletide, which is I think 30 or 31 this year of the same exact show all throughout November and December, last week of November into December. And so I going from last week to this week, classical program we did Boulanger, Overture to Taras Bulba. I don't remember the composer on that one, and then it's the Boulanger Fantasy and
Mhm.
Tchaik Six.
Mhm.
So very heavy classical program. What I try
Mhm.
to do is the pieces that I know well, like Tchaik Six or Brahms One was the previous week.
Mhm. Mhm.
I'll basically, maybe this sounds bad to admit, but I'll save those for like the Saturday, Sunday, and Monday before the next week, because we always
Mhm.
have Monday off. If
Okay.
we're having a full week, our first rehearsal starts on Tuesday.
Sure.
So
Sure.
I'll start kind of bringing those back, just making sure everything's in their place,
Mhm.
working on any particularly difficult stuff Saturday, Sunday, Monday, because Saturday, we usually don't have anything in the morning. We only have, I teach on Saturdays.
Mhm.
But we don't have anything until the 5:30 p.m. concert.
Mhm.
Sunday is usually free. Again,
Mhm.
also teach.
Mhm.
And then Monday is free. So it's about finding the times where you have nothing else really going on that you can
Mhm.
make sure you can just focus primarily on that.
Right.
Because I like to very clearly separate when I'm practicing orchestra and when I'm practicing solo.
Mhm.
Because even though hypothetically one would like to approach them in the same way,
Mhm.
when I'm going through orchestra, I'm making sure everything's in the place. Um, I'm not looking for perfection. I'm
Mhm.
looking for, do I know what's going on everywhere? And obviously, I
Ah.
want to get everything up to like 95%, but I'm
Mhm.
not looking for that extra 5% that takes the most time to really
Right.
make sure every note is like the most pristine jewel. It's just basically making sure I know where to fit in and how to
Mhm.
lead and all that fun stuff.
Right.
Because I feel like that's the most important thing when it comes time.
Mhm.
And obviously, like I said, it's still 95%, which is more than enough for what we need. But then when we go to practicing, for example, I'm bringing back Shostakovich Concerto right now for
Right.
March because again we have all this time. Even when we have Yuletide, we have I think 4 rehearsals, and a lot of them are just not necessarily for the musicians. They're more so for all the stage artists, the dancers, and the singers. And then after that, we don't have any rehearsals. It's just straight concerts. And we usually have about 6 concerts a week, sometimes 8, sometimes 7. And so then you kind of can turn your brain off a little bit, especially after you've done like 15 of the same shows. You just show up, you still enthusiastic, still play it as if it's your first show, which is like, because also like the unspoken rules, like these tickets are not cheap. They sell out every year. I think last year the orchestra just on ticket sales raised like $2.5 million.
Oh, wow.
Just on ticket sales for December.
Wow.
Because it's a holiday tradition. People pay a lot of money to see this.
Right.
And you want to do it justice because, this might be the only time they come and see the symphony each year. And you want them to have a lasting positive memory. You don't want them to look at the orchestra and everybody seems like slumped over. It's like, oh, why do I have to be here? Even if you feel like that on the inside, I personally don't, because I love the inside so much. But even if you feel like that, you have to put on a happy face and you have to basically go through and make some magic kind of thing.
Right.
But when you're not doing that, you don't have to worry about preparing for a new program. You don't have to do anything, which is why I like just doing Yuletide. And so that's why I started doing Shostakovich Concerto. So when I practice Shostakovich, it's much more about like, I know I only have a certain amount of time to practice. So instead of looking at the entire scope of the piece like I would for like Tchaik 6 that I'm playing, I will look at, for example, the 3 hardest passages from the movement and just drill those until my fingers are nearly bleeding kind of thing. Actually, I mean, I drill them today. As an orchestral cellist, you don't really... sometimes if you aren't practicing solo or anything, and you're just doing like technique and stuff, a lot of times your thumb callus can start to fade a little bit.
Sure.
And so I was practicing the cadenza of Shostakovich today, and the thumb callus has a little bit of a blister on it. So I know it's like going back to high school days. Back when I was learning how to relax during thumb position, but but it's that kind of thing where I don't like to mix the two practices. Like I don't like to do like, I'll do half an hour of Tchaik 6, then half an hour of Shostakovich or whatever. I'd rather just do like, let's do like 2 hours in the morning of Tchaik 6, make sure everything's there, and then take a break, take lunch. I have a little amazingly cute wherever he went. He was making a lot of noise earlier, chewing on a bone, but I have a little 10-pound dog that'll like take on a walk, take to the dog park, and then just like sit down and then do a couple hours on Shostakovich kind of thing. As you alluded to, it gets very hectic then when you start preparing for auditions as well, because then you have to use every single free second, and you kind of have to, it sounds like a really bad thing to say because everybody is like, oh, if you feel pain, stop kind of thing. Sometimes people don't have that luxury.
Exactly.
I have a lot of Tiger Balm CBD and Salon Pass patches
for
that reason. Because also, like, if you want to practice like 5 to 6 hours a day, that's required for a big audition like that.
Right.
And you have a double rehearsal, and you have like 2 lessons that day. That's you might practice. I remember my San Francisco was different because we were during a work stoppage because of COVID. But the last one that I did before that, for example, was Boston. And I remember. I was also in a quartet back then, and I had less students. I had like 4 or 5 students. I would have, I would get up and practice an hour and a half before 10 a.m. rehearsal, and have 10 to 3:30 rehearsal for a double. Then have a quartet rehearsal, usually from 4 to 6 or 7, and then get back and practice 3 to 4 hours at the hall, and sometimes staying to like 1 a.m. at the hall kind of thing. So in that case, like and I feel like actually, speaking to a previous point about learning how to not play with tension, that's a really good, I mean, the silver lining of that is it was really good at forcing you to get rid of every bit of tension, because if you are tense when you're practicing, if you're tense while you're playing during the double rehearsal, like it's game over. You can't last that long when you're playing. So the only way that you're able to get all that practicing done is if you focus on efficiency and relaxation.
Well, and I'm curious now because you brought up how you were the runner-up of San Francisco a couple years ago, and you were a finalist for Boston. So you're clearly like kind of on the circuit still for auditions. So are you consistently working on those excerpts to like make sure that you're ready for the next big audition that comes up, or how is?
Sure. I mean, a lot of it ends up being I'll do a post-mortem after each audition, and each audition kind of focuses on different things. The important thing to realize is that every excerpt is chosen for a reason.
Right.
And for example, if they say entire Brahms too, I remember seeing, I think it was LA Principals list in like 2012. I remember
Mhm.
seeing they asked for like all of Also Sprach, all of Brahms too. And it's like they're asking for that because they want a seasoned player who have played that many
Mhm.
times in the
Mhm.
orchestra so they don't have to worry about that.
Mhm.
Instead of somebody who's never played them freaking out about like playing the entire Brahms too. So a lot of times, for example, I'll take away a couple things because even auditions go well. Even for example, the one that's at the end of that list that isn't on the bio is Utah. And
Mhm.
even when things go really well and you win the audition kind of
Mhm.
thing, there
Mhm.
are still things that you can do better. There are
Mhm.
still things that, in my mind, and I know this is an unrealistic thing, I want to eventually get to the point where there's not a single person that votes against. And
Yeah.
a lot of it comes from the idea that, and again, like I said, it's completely unrealistic because people can still vote against because like, oh, beautiful player, but I disagree with the phrasing kind of thing. And
Right.
that's just
Right.
a
Right.
personal preference kind of thing.
Right. Right.
But I want to get to the point where like nothing can be said technically or
Yeah.
musically or anything. And so a lot of that is not necessarily because you can play something perfectly in the practice room, but a lot of it is understanding your tendencies when you get nervous, when you're under
Mhm.
pressure, when you have
Yeah.
to, for example, San Francisco semifinal round,
Mhm.
I was warming up for close to 3.5 or 4 hours
Oh,
because
wow.
they got so behind because they also managed to jam some prelim. I think it was the prelim round. They put a bunch of people in the morning and didn't tell us. So we were just like warming up for
Oh.
4 hours.
Oh.
So when your hands get cold and you get tired, and like when you're at the brink of just like losing focus,
Mhm.
what do you need to focus on to make sure you get through and still execute that excerpt? And
Right.
so, for example, I remember Boston,
Mhm.
the excerpt that let me down the most was Mozart 35. It
Oh.
wasn't clear. It wasn't. I like to think about Mozart 35, for example, the last one as um, a beautifully angular excerpt where it needs to have
Mm.
a lot of energy, but it
Right.
needs to be able to um, switch from loud to soft at the drop of a pin, kind of thing.
Mm.
And so every beginning needs to be completely clean. Every left hand articulation needs to be there. So it just there were enough things that were just weren't right for me. So then I spent the next after I basically took a week off of cello completely just to
Mhm.
kind of detox slightly.
Yeah.
Um, and then after that, after about a month of just kind of like getting back into the gist of practicing for the ISO again,
Mhm.
then I just started working on Mozart 35.
Mhm.
And I was really happy because then once San Francisco rolled around, I
Mhm.
was actually, yeah, they did ask for Mozart 35.
Mhm.
Um, I felt much more comfortable about it.
Mhm.
There are other excerpts from San Francisco and from Utah that I didn't feel comfortable with.
Mhm.
And I mean, not feeling comfortable is a kind of vague way to say it. I felt they weren't as strong as the other ones.
Sure.
And so a lot of it would be I won't be working on like an entire list,
Mhm.
but I'll be working on the deficiencies that I had that would prevent me from in the future having any negative votes, basically.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah.
That's really smart. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So, kind of diverging away from cello slightly for just a moment. So I noticed on your Instagram that you are an avid runner, which I am as well. Probably
Nice.
not to the extent as you, from what I can tell, and which is
Sure.
crazy. It's I think there's kind of a thing with that because I know Carter Bray was
Mm.
also a marathon runner. So,
Mm.
so yeah, no, I've seen that you've run multiple marathons.
Mm.
So this is like a three-part question.
Sure.
What initially drew you to running, and how do you think that particular endeavor enhances your work as a cellist, if at all? And also, do you see any parallels between preparing for an audition and preparing for a marathon?
Sure. So the initial kind of catalyst to get running was during COVID. Like a lot of people, I sat on my butt and did nothing. Because also, at first, it was kind of like a cool vacation because it
Yeah.
was like, oh yeah, we're just gonna stay at home for 2 weeks and do nothing. And then
Right.
after a while, it's like, oh shoot, 6 months have passed.
Right. Yes.
But then also like you, I mean, not to like get dark, but
Yeah.
like you're sitting at home and the arts were the first thing to be cut. Um, you feel like you have no purpose in because it not again dark and philosophical.
Yeah.
It's with music, it's a unique career because you are tied so close to your art form that it almost becomes inherent with you. So a lot of this, not to also kind of crap on Gen Zers, but like a
Yeah.
lot of this Gen Z like quiet quitting
Right,
or
right,
like disassociation from work, like that just can't happen with music, at least
right.
from where I am, because also I'm a millennial. So like I
Yeah.
I because also I'm a very like all or nothing person. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
if I'm not doing anything, I feel useless. And
yeah.
so that plus my whole family is either in medicine or both my brothers are in med school right now in
Hmm.
Indianapolis as well.
Hmm.
And so I just felt like I was sitting there. I didn't have anything that I could do to help. I kind of distracted myself by ordering takeout way too much and watching Netflix. And before I knew it, I was about 30 pounds heavier
No.
and I just felt disgusting. I, it was one of those where even before this, I wasn't really running.
Mhm,
I don't want to even say competitive because I'm not even a competitive runner now, just
mhm,
because that keeps me sane.
mhm,
Um, but I would like run 5Ks with friends. We have a fantastic marathon in town called the Monumental Marathon.
mhm.
And sorry, let me just silence that.
No, you're good.
Called the Monumental Marathon. And they
Mhm,
have a great 5K. And
mhm,
I would do that every year. I do the turkey trots with my families.
mhm,
Um, and so it's one of those where, running was always part of it.
mhm,
But then once I gained all that weight and then realized that like it also negatively affected cello as well because I just felt
mhm.
lethargic. I felt like my brain was just foggy. It
Yeah.
also was a product of me just eating like crap all the time where like I didn't have a very nutrient dense diet. A lot of it
Yeah.
would be just like, let's get Five Guys today. I like burgers.
Yeah,
Also
yeah.
that's for the part four of the question. That is my post race meal is burger,
Mm.
fries, and a beer. Um, but yeah, no, it's one of those where I actually didn't start initially running. I started going to Orange Theory classes
Oh,
because
okay.
there was an Orange Theory in Bloomington, and I have to shout out the one of my biggest initial inspirations
Mhm.
were the Orange Theory coaches, especially
Oh,
Coach Jean at Orange Theory Bloomington.
okay.
She is one of the most, she's an ultra runner now, so ultra
Uh-huh.
marathons. And
Uh.
I remember this is before I had a coach, because I have a running coach, running and strength coach now.
Oh, wow.
But
Okay.
before I had a coach, we did something called a dry try. And this was the first time I did the weight loss challenge. And
Mhm.
I actually lost all the weight plus about
Mhm.
15 pounds. And I was in the best shape that I've been in. And I felt
Mhm.
really good. I felt like I had energy to, because also, like I was saying, when you have to eventually, I mean, not at this time, but eventually do doubles,
Right.
chamber, teaching, everything, you need to be able to feel like you're in a good enough shape to do all that without feeling like you have to rely on caffeine or just bad food. And
Right.
so I remember we did this dry try, which is like a triathlon for Orange Theory, which
Uh.
is 100 body weight exercises, and they break it down into like 10, so you do like squats and push-ups and stuff like that.
Oh, sure.
And then I think like 2,000 meter row, or I can't remember how much row, but a decent
Uh.
amount of row, like
Right.
about 15, 20 minutes worth of rowing, and then
Mhm.
you have to run a 5K.
Oh,
And I
wow.
remember it was getting hard, and coach was on the mic and she was going through and she was just like, what do you want to do? What are you doing this for? And she went through and had everybody, while you're running a 5K, about to die or puke. um it's like, and I just blurred out because it was in my head, it was like, I want to eventually run a marathon before I'm not
Mm,
able to. And she just ran with that, and she saw me after the class, after
mhm,
the dry try, and she was just like, you 100% can do this. Like, you
mhm,
already, like, just sign up for one and find a coach, and
mhm,
I have 100% faith in you. I didn't even have
mhm,
that much faith in myself. So I found a coach who actually ended up being another incredible point of inspiration.
mhm,
She's a badass runner who
mhm.
like was also, she's finishing up her physical therapy school as well. So also a lot of her exercises that she programs in aren't just for like legs and feet, but they're
Right.
also for like correcting a lot of the issues that happen with cello. So a lot of like
Mm,
rotator cuff strengthening,
mhm.
a lot of tricep and bicep stuff to make sure that you can support yourself as you play.
Right.
And so then I basically told her my goal. And again, it was one of those where immediately she was like, okay, we got this. Let's do this.
Yeah.
Let's start right now building the
Right.
base. So did the first marathon. And even though I absolutely fell apart
Mhm,
by mile 18 or 20, the wheels
mhm,
fell off, hit the
mhm,
wall,
mhm.
everything. I crossed the finish line. I saw my parents holding my dog. Um, if there's something that if there's one thing you should take away from this that you should know
Mhm,
about me is that I love
mhm.
my dog more than I love anybody that I've
Yeah,
met,
yeah,
basically.
yeah, that's awesome.
And so or almost anybody.
Mhm.
But yeah, basically I saw them holding it, I just like broke down. It was just like this is
Oh,
like the most amazing thing
right,
ever
right,
because also that was a very hard year for family as well with like
sure.
a lot of pre-existing conditions and all that fun
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah.
And so that and then immediately signed up for another one. It fell off even further during Carmel Marathon the next spring, and then I
Mm,
just vowed like I want to like do it right the next time. So
yeah.
we took a lot of time off and just basically um, focused on just enjoying running again instead of
Mm,
feeling like oh I have to do another marathon kind of thing. And
mm.
then that kind of culminated in Chicago. I throughout that point I should probably also mention that I got a stress fracture
Oh,
because just a lot of different reasons. I went with the Pittsburgh Symphony on tour
uh-huh.
to Europe, just kind of
Oh,
subbing in the
yeah,
back.
yeah,
It was
yeah.
really fun. And so part of that was I kind of didn't do as much gym work as I needed to for strength and
Uh-huh.
conditioning. I got the wrong pair of shoes, was running on
Mm,
cobblestone streets, up my
mm,
mileage too much, and that
yeah,
ended up with a stress fracture.
yeah.
So after that, after recovering from that, focusing on why I love running again and really tackling the idea of nutrition, ran
Hmm.
Chicago Marathon last month
Awesome.
and ran a 10-minute PR.
Oh,
So now
wow.
it's 3:42. So I'm really happy
Wow.
with that.
That's
But then
awesome. Yeah.
as I crossed the finish line, this is also, should maybe go to that all or nothing mentality.
Mhm.
I already had this in my mind as well, but now like speaking it into existence, maybe.
Right.
One of my goals, I don't know even when the cutoff time, let's say by the time I'm 50, because it's an expensive goal and I don't want to spend that much money at one time,
Right.
is to do all six, soon to be seven marathon majors. So did Chicago, that
Oh,
was my first, but
right.
that also includes qualifying for Boston.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is why I wanted to give it a lot of time because I am nowhere near that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
even seeing, I remember I did Monumental and I was spectating our concertmaster and a lot of my friends were running
Hmm.
the marathon as well as my coach. Who
Hmm.
shout out to her for PRing there.
Yeah.
Um, and so there was one person who finished right under the 3 hour mark. And
Wow.
he was like, tears were streaming down his face. And I think
Uh-huh.
his significant other or
Mm.
somebody was just like, "You're going to Boston. You're going to Boston
Oh,
qualify." And he was just like sobbing as he was
oh,
about to finish. It was
right.
like he was starting to break down, but you could tell he was going to make it. And
Yeah,
it's just like that's so inspiring. Like
right.
just like that amount you're able to push. Anywho,
Yeah.
that's the first that's the first part of your 3 part question.
Yeah,
I like to talk about running. Sorry.
yeah, no, I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, so basically to get back into it,
Mm,
so yeah, eventually qualifying for Boston, I have a lot of
mm,
work to do. I'm
mm.
currently in a clean up my diet and start working at the gym regularly again. So to get a little bit closer to where I need to be for that. So anywho, in terms of benefiting playing, I think a lot of it had to do with what I was initially saying about just like having more energy,
Yeah.
feeling like you have control over your body,
Mm,
not feeling like you're quite as limited because also as a beginner runner I started out running 2 miles and running a
mhm,
5K was my long run
mhm,
kind of thing,
mhm,
and it's still not a short distance but it's
mhm.
also one of those where now during marathon training my longest run was like 20 and a half miles, and
Yeah.
so now it's just like your body can do amazing things if you
Mhm.
give it time, you're
Yeah.
patient with it, and you feed it properly. And whether that's actual food
Mhm.
or working on a lot of specific exercises. For running, it's a lot of strength single leg exercises. For
Right.
cello, it's a lot of technique, a lot
Right.
of um, just kind of focusing on the fact that even though technique and etudes and that kind of stuff is boring,
Mhm.
um, it's the same thing with running where it seems like it's if you focus on just doing technique for the sake of technique, you're going to
Mhm.
get bored of it really quickly.
Right.
Same thing with just like single leg exercises. Like, yeah, great, you can do a Bulgarian split squat, good for you.
Yeah.
But it ends up being, with music, to increase your technique so that you can most efficiently portray the musicality that you want to portray. So you can phrase
Mm,
like you want to without having to
right.
worry about limitations technique
Yeah.
wise.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of that in there, and just kind of understanding that. Um, as long as you're patient and you put your mind to it, you can accomplish really fantastic things.
Right.
And that's kind of the mantra, is just like don't limit yourself. One of my
Yeah.
favorite marathon runners is Eliud Kipchoge, who was up until Chicago, actually the race that I ran.
Mhm.
Um, he was the world record holder
Oh,
of the
wow.
marathon. And so his whole thing is no human is limited, and I think that's just an absolutely fantastic thing.
Mm,
In terms of actually preparing for auditions and preparing for marathons, for example,
mhm,
I think there's a huge kind of shared space, and
mhm.
so part of it is I remember, you know, no audition and no marathon is going to be easy. A
Yeah.
lot of it is getting into that mindset of mental toughness that no
Mhm.
matter what goes wrong, you just keep going through. The one that I like to think about a lot is if you miss a shift, let's say you miss the shift in Don Quixote, make
Yeah.
that next phrase the most beautiful phrase the committee has heard all day. Um,
Mm,
One thing that Brenton Smith, the principal of Houston Symphony, said when I was playing basically mock auditions for him
mhm,
when I was at Aspen was,
mhm.
you don't start from 100 and every bad thing you do takes off points. You start from zero
Ah,
and every good thing you do
right.
adds something into the, like, adds water to the glass kind of thing. You want to end up as
Mm.
close to 100 as you can.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Yeah.
because when you walk out on stage, the committee, especially, I mean, there are a couple that take the screen down, which I think is I don't know. I don't like that. But
Mhm.
the ones that do keep the screen up, you walk out on stage, the committee has no preconceived notion of anything. They have no idea who you are.
Right.
From that very first note, that can add water into that glass kind of thing. So
Right.
part of it is that, again, that mental toughness, the idea of not having to practice everything every day. For
Mm.
example, if your idea of training for a 5K is, let's go run a 5K every day and try to get
Mhm.
faster,
Mhm.
you're going to get injured and you're going to
Mhm.
die.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Granted, people are going to die anyways, but also, like, if
Yeah.
you try to just like get better at taking auditions by
Mhm.
just taking auditions or just
Yeah.
running through a piece, like, that's not going to do anything. You
Right.
have to deconstruct it. You have to figure out, for example, to use the running analogy, you have to do your 800s on the track at
Mm.
faster than marathon pace. You have to do that when you have to get comfortable running that pace. You have to get comfortable playing that audition piece under those circumstances. So
Mhm.
mimicking a lot of the practice, because also it's the same thing. Like, when you're in a marathon build, you never
Mhm.
run 26 miles.
Right.
There are studies to show a rate of hugely diminishing returns after 3 hours. So
Mm.
anything after 3 hours, any positives you have are vastly outweighed by the negatives of potentially getting injured. And
Mm.
so same thing happens. So you never actually run 26 miles until the actual race. Same
Mm.
thing is like so what you're training for and what you're racing for are, like, they feel sometimes two completely different things. So you have
Mm.
to use your training to kind of prepare you as best as you can, like practice your fueling strategy, get
Right.
up at the same time you wake up on race day, make sure
Mm.
you eat the same breakfast, all that fun
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Same thing with like auditions.
Right.
You have to make sure, for example, I remember my high school teacher is in the Chicago Symphony,
Mhm.
and he one time said, if you want to get really good at a fast excerpt and be prepared for anything, soak your hands in cold water and then play through Bartered Bride. And it's like, that's a nefarious thing to say. But at the same time, it like makes things way easier if you
Right.
actually get to that point where, like, because a lot of us have been there where, like, you're standing
Yeah.
backstage and
Yeah.
they're like, oh, the committee's taking a 5-minute break
Right.
or something like that. There's a
Yeah.
bathroom break. You're just standing there, like, you can kind of warm up a little bit,
Yeah.
but you can't really do anything. So you might walk on stage and your hands are a little bit cold. You have to be
Right.
prepared for that. You have to be
Right.
prepared for being extra nervous during a hiding concerto. You have to be
Right.
prepared to kind of what I was saying before about, like, learn what your body does when you're nervous or when you're
Right.
under pressure. For example, I have a tendency of, going to turtle mode like that if I
Mm.
get
Mhm.
nervous and really
Mhm.
focusing on the density of sound.
Right.
Whereas a lot of it has to do with, then I understand that from many years now. I
Mhm.
understand that, and I think about relaxing, really projecting my sound out towards the committee, out towards the hall,
Right.
and really focusing on the phrasing instead of just trying to press as much as possible to get through that nervousness.
Yeah.
So,
That's really
yeah.
funny. That's really funny you mentioned that about the barter bride thing because
Uh-huh.
Eric Kim, who I didn't study with at IU, and I know you did, but I took his rep class a couple years ago, and when we got to Don Juan, I think he said something along the lines of, "You have to be able to wake up at 4 in the morning and just nail that, and then like that's how you know you're ready," kind of thing. So that's really
Yeah.
funny. Yeah.
I think that actually might be, I might be misspeaking, but I think that
Mm,
that idea might be a Leonard Rose thing, because I remember Or maybe my high
Yeah.
school teacher Eric talked
Yeah.
at one point because I know
Right.
I've heard people say that as well from Eric
Yeah.
that he said that. But my high school teacher said it's a little bit more of, again, think about this being said to a
Right.
17-year-old, but you have to be able to wake up at 2 a.m. with the worst hangover of your life, and be able to play through the list perfectly.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
so I guess 2 a.m. with a hangover and 4 a.m. without a hangover are kind of equal.
Right. Well, and
Yeah.
Austin, I just love your passion for running, but I want to talk a little bit more about what you mentioned before in terms of how we were, we were all struggling at the beginning of the pandemic. And I was actually thinking about this on a drive a couple days ago, and I feel like as musicians, and really all artists, our whole entity and being, a lot of our efforts are just proving to the rest of society or trying to validate our work as if, because I think for non-musicians or non-artists, they see the arts as potentially something, nothing more than an accessory, like something that's nice to have if we can have it, but not a necessity. And I can definitely understand the like literal like argument for that, but if you try to, I mean, if you think about the deeper meaning of like why we do what we do, then of course it's a necessity, but it's just it's hard to, it's an uphill battle for us as musicians, I think, all the time with that. So
Sorry, that's my dog.
no, you're fine. Yeah, but
No, that, yeah, 100%. I think my argument would be, one second, let me go.
yeah, just grab him, bring him to the
Yeah, okay.
yeah.
It's time to introduce my dog. Oh, that's a good boy. Come here. Come here. Come here. Running away from me now. One of these times. I have an apartment that kind of loops in a circular manner. So
Right, all right.
I'll get him next time.
Oh,
He
okay,
basically
sure.
just chases me around. He's only like that big, so I'll get him before the end of the
Yeah,
podcast.
sure.
But basically, to get back to your question, I think a lot of it has to do with, we shouldn't judge based on just pure essentials.
Right.
We shouldn't be in the point in society where, like, okay, food, water, shelter, maybe
Right.
Wi-Fi.
Exactly.
It shouldn't be that's the absolute bare minimum. That doesn't
Right.
define a society. What
Exactly.
defines a society, if you think about ancient Greeks, what defines them? Their innovation, their literature, the
Right.
fact that they had the first written music, for example,
Right.
their culture.
Mm.
And so the same thing happens with every great society. It's not just about, oh, they had food. Yeah, no shit, they had food.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so a lot of it has to do with what kind of society do we want to be. And this is not saying, you have to have a like high classical music, like you have to have Baroque period players to be a
Right.
great society.
Right.
A lot of it is, you should have accessible music to have a great society. Because also this gets into a bigger conversation about like the history of classical music is inherently troubled, and it is inherently elitist.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's a reason why people don't always feel comfortable coming to the concerts, because they're like, oh, do I clap here? Do I not clap here? It's a
Right.
lot of
Right.
tradition.
Right.
One person once described it essentially as, for example, an atheist going to a Catholic service kind of thing, where it's just like you don't know when to stand, when to kneel, when to pray, when to sing, whatever.
That's so
And in some ways, it is kind of true. But I'm a huge fan of just breaking that stuff down, because it's the same thing. For example, actually, I'm looking at the music right now for this. We're doing a mashup concert of Igor Stravinsky and Kendrick Lamar.
Oh, wow.
And there's this fantastic conductor who came up with this idea. He does a lot of these mashups. His name is Steve Hackman. He does like Brahms v Radiohead, Beethoven and Coldplay, stuff like that, where he takes a lot of the motives. For example, I love this one because he really gets into, what is the human experience? What makes us human? A lot of it comes down to the basic emotions of good and bad.
Right.
And not only does Kendrick Lamar's, it's the Damn album, the one that won the Pulitzer, and it goes through all these human emotions in a kind of play-like setting where you don't really know if it's real or not in the album, but it goes through all these emotions that make us human. And here is my dog.
Oh.
He just came and sat down next to me.
What's his
He's
name?
a guard dog. His name is Honey Tea.
Oh, Honey Tea.
He's also about as chill as it comes, so he just like acts like a little baby. So until he hears, I think, so we have a valet garbage at my apartment. So like at 8 p.m. on the dot, people come around and collect the garbage from outside. So he hears them. He's like, no, not on my watch. Anywho, the show is basically Stravinsky, obviously, Petrushka is about a doll that's enchanted and comes to life and struggles to feel like what is it to be human. And at
Right.
the end, the doll dies, but then it kind of messes with your mind because then it's like, but the doll wasn't alive to begin with, even if the
Mm,
doll died. But you still feel a sense of loss.
right.
And so Steve ties it perfectly together, where like each individual track that kind of goes through. For example, there's anger when the puppets are fighting and he's experiencing anger for the first time, or lust when the ballerina is seducing another puppet, kind of thing. It's
Mm,
just like it goes so well, and I love this concept because it brings classical audiences a new and fresh experience that they can't hear anywhere else, unless they want to, I don't know, go to like Chicago or Cincinnati or something. And then it gives a lot of non-traditional audiences, somebody who might not know who Stravinsky is, it might give them a glimpse into what classical music can offer as well. Because I feel like a lot of times with modern society, we're much more focused on, you know, what is the TLDR version of this art
yeah.
form kind of thing?
Yeah.
Like, do you have a 30-second clip to post on TikTok kind of thing?
Mm,
Which is, I, in some ways that's bad, but in some ways it kind of forces us to get to the core of like, why do we exist in
mm,
terms of like classical music or arts organizations?
right.
Um, and a lot of the struggle these days, because I know a lot of orchestras are facing audience shortages,
Mhm,
or just audiences that don't come back, kind of thing.
right.
It's more so about getting in front of people's eyes and showing them the offerings that we have. I remember I did an interview with this fantastic local writer,
Mhm,
um, and one of the big things that we talked about was just like, personally, I remember personally offering this because I truly feel passionate about like people who don't know classical music or haven't been to a classical music concert before. I can look at this upcoming season, for it's not out yet, but I can look
mhm,
at this upcoming season, for
mhm,
example,
mhm,
and I can guarantee I can find something that you will like.
mhm, mhm,
And I will explain it to you. I will explain why it's important. I will explain how it can potentially relate to your life, kind of thing.
mhm,
If I start to get to know the person, and so I truly think that it's more of a just making it accessible to people,
right.
and part of that is breaking down the barriers of that make it, you know, I don't know, just difficult to attend. So, no stuffiness. If somebody claps, for example, we were talking about this last week with Czech Six.
Mhm,
I actually like when people clap on the third movement of Czech
yeah. Yeah.
Six,
Yeah.
because then there's actually there's one person who, I think this person comes to the symphony regularly, but
Mhm,
maybe he just forgot this happened. So
mhm.
he like just stood up, like suddenly standing ovation right at the end of the third movement, and then the conductor is like holding her hand out like this,
Uh-huh.
and she basically starts conducting, and as they're clapping, like I watched it because I mean it's the same four notes over and over basically.
Right.
So I
Right.
watched it, and you can see his like pure elation go to like, oh,
Yeah.
and like it makes you like, you can see them start to realize that this is not a happy piece, this is not a
Right.
joyous piece, this
Right.
is the piece before Tchaikovsky died. I don't
Yeah.
think Tchaikovsky even heard the premiere of this piece,
Yeah.
because he was a really troubled, and he had a lot of the issues that we feel today as a society,
Mhm,
and he chose to express them through music. And
yeah.
so that is a direct thing. For example, um, somebody who's truly gone through loss
Yeah.
can understand this is not just an interval that he's playing.
Mhm,
This is the feeling that you get when you miss somebody so much and you just want to talk to them, but
right.
they're no longer here. And so, I mean, it doesn't even have to be that down. It could even be like, if you want to just be in a good mood,
Mhm,
come and hear like a Mozart Symphony Concertante kind of
right.
thing.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and just kind of don't come in with any pure like preconceived notions, and just kind of just sit back, learn a little bit about the piece, just read some of the program notes, so you know like what the composer was going through at the time. If you have any questions, literally just come up and ask any of the musicians. That's the
Right.
good thing about having such a young orchestra as well, is
Mhm,
sometimes there's a tradition of having that fourth wall. But
mhm,
like if I see a donor or a patron
mhm,
that like I was at their gala table the previous year, or we just like had a good conversation after a concert, like they'll come up and say hi. And or
mhm.
if they're like, I'm not sure I understand that piece, then
Yeah.
I'll be like, oh yeah, I don't understand it either. Like, well, actually, like this is what I look
Yeah.
for.
Right.
I
Right.
remember there was a concert we did. It's called the Infusion Festival. It's no
Mhm,
longer a thing,
mhm,
but we did it. We partnered. It was for Earth Day, basically. And we partnered for with a bunch of different organizations. We played this piece called "Become Ocean" by
mhm,
John Luther Adams,
mhm,
which is the absolute most boring piece I've ever played in my entire life. It's literally the same like 6 or 7 notes,
Mhm.
and it goes from triplets to quadruplets to quintuplets to sextuplets to
Oh.
septuplets to octuplets, and just goes on and on.
Okay.
Nothing happens. It's literally when I say it's the same notes, it's the
Mhm.
same notes for the entire piece.
Oh
And
my
so see all
God.
these waves and all this like ethereal stuff. And then I saw a patron that comes to a lot of the
Mhm.
classical concerts,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
she was basically just like, was there some deeper meaning in there? I was like, no, it was really boring. Got lost a couple times, got back on, like felt like I was floating
Oh
in the
my God.
ocean. And she's
That's
like, wait,
so
so you
funny.
didn't like it either? I was like, no, you don't have to
Yeah.
like every piece. I
Yeah.
despise that piece. But like it's just like, oh my God, really? I didn't like it either, but I was like nervous that like maybe like like it was like a new masterpiece. Like, no,
Right.
you can make whatever you want.
Right.
Exactly. So it's
Yeah.
it's one of those words like it's so I think a lot of it to get back to the initial thing is
Mhm.
there's there's inherent value that, and again maybe it's societal, like not to get into like super philosophical, but it's like the
Right.
reason why, for example, as societies people view murder as bad, like
Mhm.
it's something that people viscerally experience,
Mhm.
like it's a visceral reaction. I mean, again, some people would hear, like I speak this strong about Czech Six or
Yeah.
Mozart or
Yeah.
anything,
Yeah.
people might hear that and they might not like it, and that's
Mhm.
totally fine. I'm just
Right.
saying that there's this reaction that people have when they hear this for the first time without any preconceived notions
Mhm.
that I think draws them to something like this. And I guess the last part of it is like somebody once called an orchestra a glorified cover band, which is basically true. So I honestly enjoy playing a lot of the new music. Like we had
Yeah.
Nadia Boulanger, who's
Mhm.
again, there's again talking about the kind of troubled history of classical music. Um, Women composers, composers of color, all that, they haven't been given the same representation.
Right.
And it's so gratifying to see finally we're playing. I mean, granted, not even close to the same levels that we need to be playing in
Right.
terms of um, old dead white guys and non old dead
Yeah. The
white
the
guys,
ratio is a
basically.
little bit off still.
Exactly, exactly. It's still
Yeah.
there's still a lot of work to be done, but
Right.
the fact that like people can come see, I remember we played I mean, again, I don't want to basically minimize everything into like one quartet piece that
Mhm.
is like really effective, but the piece that we had a quartet that played a bunch of nursing homes, and we did
Mhm.
a Mozart divertimento, a nice little 10-minute piece. We played Jesse Montgomery's Strum, and then a Dvorak piano quintet.
Mhm.
And actually, the piece that people were most drawn to was Jesse Montgomery's piece, because like
Okay.
Dvorak was like, yeah, that was beautiful.
Yeah.
Jesse's piece was like, it's like rhythmically charged,
Mhm.
it's something new and fresh. And so the number of people who were just like, there was actually people who came up, and this is a very artistically, how do you put it? They know the art. They know, they
Right.
come to the orchestra, they're
Right.
subscribers.
Right.
And they came up to us and was just like, can you write down some composers who are like the piece that we just heard? And so
Oh
it's like,
wow.
oh well,
Yeah.
there's so many. There's like Goliath,
Mhm.
um there's I'm forgetting their names.
Mhm.
But just a lot of these composers that focus on this kind of more energetically, rhythmically charged thing. A
Right.
lot of Jesse's other pieces like that.
Mhm.
There's a fantastic cellist, I'm probably going to butcher her name, Andre Casarubios,
Mhm.
who does a lot of work with Sphinx and with a friend, Tommy Mesa, cellist, and he premieres a lot of her pieces, and it's just kind of that same religion, just kind of grabs you, and it's like it's fresh and it's new. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of that is that also helps bring new audiences in, because
Mhm.
um, it gives people like they in some ways they feel like they're a part of the time, like Beethoven's audience when Beethoven was composing. They're witnessing the birth of these fantastic pieces by these great composers. And
Yeah.
so I think it's just this, there's no one size fits all easy answer. A lot
Yeah.
of it is kind of combining basic aspects of this stuff, and there's plenty more that I haven't talked about,
Yeah.
that kind of lead to the argument that like there is an inherent value in what we do.
Right.
We just need to let the audience, especially the new audiences, understand that by themselves. We can't tell them, they can't go out and pick and be like, we have inherent value. Um, we just have to present what we do and present
Mhm.
the most challenging, I would say, musically and mentally,
Yeah.
programs, the most diverse programs, and somebody will find something that they love within there, and then that will be the thing that brings them back to live music. Because once people, and again, it's one of those where, I go on Spotify and I listen to Mahler too with like, I don't know, Bernstein recording, conducting.
Mhm.
It's like once you actually experience live music, then you're like, yeah, that's great. But anytime I'm able to see Mahler 2 with the orchestra, I'm driving however far it takes to
Yeah.
go there kind of thing.
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
think a lot of people feel the same way, even if they're not used to classical music. So,
Right. Right. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, so going back a little bit to, talking shop quickly, for cellists that are listening and are on the audition circuit,
mhm.
this is actually interesting because you're both like in the process of taking auditions and listening to auditions. So I'm really curious. Do you have any
Mhm.
thoughts or recommendations on what concerto is most effective? Because I mean, of course, the Dvorak is like kind of
Mhm.
the standard one, but
Yeah.
have you noticed recently like a wave of like people playing or choosing to play a different concerto, or just thoughts on that altogether?
Sure. So we, as a uh, I guess as a one person cello section, because usually when what I found best for audition lists is and this is again, I like tangents, but what I found best for audition lists is I'll come up with a list,
Mhm.
and I'll forward it to the committee, be like, hey, what do you think? Should we
Mhm.
change some stuff?
Right.
And for example, I think that worked really well for our past 1 year cello audition that we just had.
Mhm.
Came with the list, and we only really had to change two excerpts. We just replaced one with another, and that was it. And so there's this trend of asking for either Dvorak or Schumann concerto as well as Haydn D. And I like that trend a lot. I do not do Dvorak, I do Schumann because I find Dvorak gets my heart rate up too much.
Mhm.
And again, one of the things that I focus on as I play auditions is relaxing, being the
Yeah.
most efficient artist as I can,
Yeah.
focusing on the musicality. And I feel like Schumann, the main things in Schumann are sound, phrasing,
Right.
and pulse. Because
Right.
obviously you can play something exactly in rhythm, but it sounds boring if you have a pulse going forwards and backwards.
Mhm.
The idea that, for example, with Heifetz, if you put a metronome, every five measures is going to line up exactly because he takes and gives time.
Yeah.
Um, so I find Schumann, for example, and I think there are a lot of people who are playing Schumann as well,
Mhm.
especially for a section audition. I don't want to like group all section auditions together,
Mhm.
and also not saying that you have to be a very soft player to play in a section. But if you play like a soloist Dvorak concerto and it's for a section audition, and if that first note is just a little bit harsh, that's the first impression that the orchestra committee is going to get,
Yeah.
and their first thought might be, "Oh, this might be too harsh for a section."
Mm.
Obviously, I'm in a different place because I'm only taking principal auditions right
Right.
now,
Right.
and so I I could make the argument for me getting away with playing Dvorak.
Mhm.
I just don't prefer Dvorak. I prefer how Schumann feels and
Mhm.
how after I play through the first couple pages of Schumann, I feel ready to play an excerpt. Whereas after Dvorak, I still feel like I'm in kind of pressing mode. And maybe
Yeah.
that's more of a me issue because I learned Dvorak when I was 12 and
Mhm.
have been playing it ever since. That's when I had a lot of tension issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas Schumann, I only learned in college, and that
Oh.
was when Mr. Leonard was working a lot on phrasing and
Mhm.
relaxation and efficiency.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's for me. I've heard actually when we had our last open, we just had, major concerto of your choice. We
Uh-huh.
had a surprising number of Shalomos, which
Oh, I
was
was okay. I
really
was going to
interesting.
ask about that. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's for the same purpose as Schumann. It's whatever's most comfortable to really sink in and start playing.
Yeah.
Because also with auditions, a lot of it is the idea that you have to turn on a dime kind of thing. Like you have to be able to play romantic concerto into a Beethoven five that focus on a couple different things, and then go into
Yeah.
Verdi Requiem, which is three other things that you focus
Right.
on.
Right.
And so Shalomo and Schumann allow you to feel like you just relax into that and get it into a positive mental space. Where
Right.
as Dvorak, it's much more about like, am I projecting enough? Am I
Yeah.
really having Dvorak for me is about power and
Right.
clarity, whereas Schumann's much more about long line and sound. And
Yeah.
I'm very proud of my sound because it's
Mhm.
something that I've worked really hard on. And so I think that that's the thing that I want to show off first.
Yeah.
And so if you feel like your power and clarity are really impressive and you can get a really rich sound, 100% go with that. It's
Mhm.
whatever you're most comfortable with, whatever puts you the best for the first impression, but also the excerpts kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting you say that about like the fact that your heart rate goes up when you play Dvorak, because I think a lot of cellists would say the same about Schumann because it's
Yeah.
so exposed and you're like kind of on a tight thin rope from the very beginning with the shifts and everything. And I
Yeah.
mean, but I guess, if your strengths are geared towards like being very lyrical, like I'm
Mhm.
sure you are,
Mhm.
then it makes sense. But I mean, Dvorak,
Mhm.
I think most cellists would agree, is still easier in a way to start, just
Mhm.
because you're just able to kind of sink into it. I mean, of
Yeah.
course, like you said, you're like you want to find the fine balance between like
Mhm.
pressing too hard or like enough. But
Mhm.
that's a really fascinating take. Because I feel like very rarely do cellists say that they would rather play Schumann over Dvorak. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, there's also there's a lot more subtlety in Schumann than there is
yeah,
in Dvorak, and
of
so I
course.
think that you can get away with a lot more in Dvorak, whereas in Schumann, it's like you said, a tightrope walk. But again, it
Yeah,
goes
yeah.
back to the idea that, at least for me, it's
Mm,
you have these two competing characters in Schumann. You have the more extroverted, kind of
mm,
slightly more aggressive character, and the more
right.
introverted, more
Mm,
subtle character.
yeah.
And so focusing on that, so and as Mr. Leonard once said to me, if you have to focus on the shifts, you haven't focused on the shifts enough in the practice room, kind of thing. And so
Shit.
it's one of those where like I know I had that. I was actually honestly playing Shalomo, and I had
Mhm,
just played I had just found out I was going to play with Colburn Orchestra,
mhm,
which is this big honor. I think they changed this lately where now it's a concerto competition, but usually the teachers would select one person from each, essentially from each instrument, and they'd be playing a concerto. So I just found out about that. I played my um, jury,
mhm,
and it went badly. It went very badly, and
mhm,
so he was stern, but he was still supportive, and that was
mhm,
where that quote came from. But
yeah.
basically, yeah, just the idea that, I mean, again, going back to whatever you're comfortable with,
Mm,
it's because I'll say Schumann.
mhm,
It sounds like you feel comfortable with Dvorak.
mhm.
Some person might feel comfortable with like Lalo or something like that.
Yeah, yeah,
But something whatever puts you in the best position for that audition, I think is the right answer.
yeah. Well, and I will say Schumann, I think regardless of how you play it, it shows more so than Dvorak who you are as a
Mhm.
cellist and a musician, because it's
Mhm.
so complex musically. And so I think if you can nail it, obviously, then it goes a farther, or it goes farther than playing Dvorak. Because Dvorak, I would say, because there's such a long tradition of Dvorak, I would say
Mhm.
that more or less people play it pretty much the same in many ways.
Exactly.
Like you don't want
Yeah.
to be offensive to it, so you keep to a tradition
Mhm.
of a certain way of playing Dvorak. So
Sure.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. So that's
Excellent.
awesome.
Mhm.
Just going into another facet of your life as a teacher,
Sure.
because you're such a multifaceted man. So, so you were
Thank you.
the you were the chair of the Indianapolis Suzuki Academy's board of
Yes.
directors, and
Mhm.
also currently teach as professor at the University of Indianapolis.
Well,
So again,
not anymore. So I
oh,
no longer at UIndy,
oh,
but
okay,
now just privately now, but up
okay,
until 2 years ago at UIndy.
okay.
Yeah.
So correction on that. So this another three-parter. First, did you grow up with the Suzuki method, and
Mhm.
also I'm curious as to what you find attractive about teaching and how your work as a teacher has helped you grow as a person and musician. So
Sure. So, yes, I did grow up with the Suzuki method. I started with the Suzuki teacher when I was 4,
Mhm.
and I essentially studied with her up until I was 9 or 10, and then somehow made the jump from Suzuki to Hans Jensen, which
Oh.
was fun. I studied with Hans for about 7 or 8 months, and he's an amazing teacher. I
Mhm.
just wasn't at the level to be prepared for that yet, because he was a very strict and very, like, he knew exactly what he wanted,
Yeah.
and I still didn't know how to practice.
Mhm.
And so, sorry, my dog's acting up again. But basically, yes. So I grew up with Suzuki. I think that one of the biggest things as a teacher is uh, preaching, doing what you say,
Yeah.
basically. So it's very easy. It kind of goes both ways, actually. So you have this idea that as a teacher, you sometimes, when I first started teaching, I didn't exactly know how to approach it. I knew that, for example, like the phrasing wasn't quite right or the sound wasn't quite right, and so a lot of times I would feel myself like I would just play it through and be like, okay, what am I doing differently that this person is not doing? And then it forces you to break down what exactly you're doing, because a lot of times, for example, I've been playing for 20, 25 years now.
Right.
You forget a lot of like the steps in between. You kind of go from A to double Z very quickly, and so it kind of forces you to be like, oh, this is what I do with the bow. I think about this angle, whereas it's like just kind of you don't even think about that after a while. So
Mhm.
it forces you to do that so that if you encounter a similar problem during your own practice, you know how to troubleshoot it a lot better.
Right.
And so part of it's that. Part of it's also, like I said, the students force you to do what you actually teach as well. So
Right.
like if you say, oh, we need to be really clear with the left hand, and then demonstrating your left hand is as muddled as a 21-year-old on their birthday night, it's not going to be as good as it could be, kind of thing.
Right.
Whereas like if you had practiced that and you practice the eights that you actually teach your students,
Yeah.
then when you demonstrate, it's like, oh, that's what it's supposed to sound like, kind of thing.
Mm,
Because that's
mm,
also, for example, like both Mr. Leonard and with Eric, it's kind of the
mm.
same thing where like when they demonstrate, it's like, ah, yeah, I have a
Yeah.
lot of work to do. So that's
Yeah.
my goal as a teacher, is to like uh, be the shining example, the knight on a white horse kind of
Yeah.
thing
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
my students in terms
Mm,
of demonstration. So,
mm,
and that's also why I despise teach like I despise demonstrating excerpts. I love teaching excerpts, but I despise
mm,
demonstrating them because like I I feel like in order to be at my best, because like they'll sound fine,
mm,
but in order to like demonstrate like this is the level you need to be at,
mhm,
like I actually have to be preparing for an audition myself. Otherwise, I'm not
mm,
like kind of the similar question that you were asking before. Like
mm,
I might practice one or two excerpts that I am not comfortable with,
mhm.
but like I don't want to go anywhere near excerpts in terms of practicing them until I have to, because I
Yeah.
find that's the best way not to burn out on them, or still to keep it relatively interesting
Yeah.
and just kind of um, still exciting, basically.
Yeah.
So let's see. What was the third part of the question? That was two.
Oh, your work as a teacher and how it helped you grow as a person and musician.
Yes. So basically that too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
basically it's just a matter of making sure that you approach it from an analytical perspective.
Yeah.
Um, because then it makes you think about a lot of things. For example, I have a student who's doing Shostakovich Concerto right now,
Mhm.
and I'm playing Shostakovich Concerto right now, and
Right.
so it forces me to think about like the order of operations and making sure it's as clean and as musical as possible by
Mm,
breaking apart their Shostakovich Concerto and also applying the same ideas to mine as well. So,
yeah. Well, and I know also digging into your past a little bit that I
mhm.
think pretty early in your tenure at IS with the ISO, you came to IU one semester as a guest
Mhm.
lecturer and taught the rep class there, right?
Yes.
So I'm guessing you tried to avoid demonstrating as much as possible, or I don't know.
I mean, at that point I was still like actively like I was still trying to figure out. I only figured out like the separation between auditions and regular practice
Mhm,
after San Francisco. So I basically was still practicing regularly. So I was still having
mhm,
to demonstrate, and
mhm.
I had a kind of two-tiered approach to that class where I'd have people individually play. I know. Sorry, I think my dog is hungry. But
No.
basically, I'd have them individually play, and then I'd have us play together as a group, and then I
Right.
demonstrate individual things that I wanted them to change, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas I know it kind of runs differently depending on each person, and
Yeah.
so a lot of it was, kind of approaching it more kind of cerebrally, like why are they asking? Why are they asking for Beethoven 5? It's obviously for intonation, rhythm,
Mhm,
direction,
mhm,
and elegance.
mhm,
And so then we go through and we ask, is this good rhythm? Is this good elegance? Is this so and so? So a lot of it is just kind of breaking it down, and you don't have to necessarily demonstrate it. I'd
mhm,
be happy to demonstrate like this is the reason, like this is what we do to make it more elegant.
mhm.
Um, but yeah, no, it's it's something to the point where like I try to describe it first, because I don't want anybody to go like, oh, it wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. It's like, yeah, because I'm not practicing excerpts right now, basically. So
Right.
it's more for the protection of my own ego than anything else, I
Yeah,
think.
that's fair.
Yeah.
Well, and just kind of going back to Mr. Ron Leonard, because I know you mentioned before how you would
Mhm.
like your life to uh emulate or kind of look like his.
Sure.
Is your in your dream scenario, is your
Mhm.
goal, are your goals more to play in a major orchestra as principal for while you're physically still in good condition, and then try to maybe go into teaching full time? Is that
Mhm.
kind of your goals and
Yes.
ambition? Yeah, yeah,
And I think it's one of those kind of going back to like how I'm as a person, I'm very all or nothing.
yeah.
And so I feel like if I just retire and do nothing, I'm just like, I mean, not to be more of it, I'll just like
All right.
basically just wither away and die, because like
Yeah.
I need something to like keep going. So in my mind, I mean, obviously right now I still have my sights set on a big five orchestra job.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so up until, whenever the point is where I feel like I think that the threshold for me would be when I feel like there's somebody up and coming who could do a better job consistently than I can. I think
Hmm.
that's the point when I would want to retire.
Mm,
Um, and so, or like when I start to notice my playing starts to decline a little bit,
sure.
whereas I feel like I always will want to teach, because even though, I mean, even like when I was injured and I couldn't really, play, I still felt like I had this like number of ideas that I wanted to try out kind of thing, even though
Hmm.
I couldn't try it because I had a lot of tendonitis. Um, and so I guess my idea would be once it hits that point, then start teaching. That's also part of the reason why I ended up going back to IU for a master's degree is because a lot of universities start requiring a secondary degree in order to
Right.
start teaching. I think it
Yeah.
used to be like bachelor's and equivalence experience or master's preferred. Now it's
Right.
doctorate preferred, master's and
Yeah.
equivalence
Exactly.
experience. And so,
Yeah.
so that's one of the main reasons, just because I don't want that to be a limitation kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it ended up having to do with just wanting to, um, I don't know, pass on the legacy of the amazing teachers that I've had, because
Hmm.
my even my Suzuki teacher was really fantastic and like got me started wanting to play the cello. My high school teacher made me want to actually like pursue this as a full-time thing.
Right.
And then my college teacher, both Mr. Leonard and Eric,
Hmm.
they both made me want to become the best principal that I can be and kind of shoot for the stars in terms of
Yeah.
positions.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is like they have been so supportive and so helpful over my career
Yeah.
that I want to then turn around and return the favor to the next
Yeah.
generation as well. Speaking
Yeah.
of next generation, like I have too many gray hairs. Um,
Yeah.
but when the time comes, like
Yeah.
that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of more of a responsibility than anything, because
Yeah.
also like I feel like for example, like with auditions, I feel like they're not very complicated.
Yeah.
But that's only because I've had Mr. Leonard and Eric
Mhm.
teach me how to do auditions, and
Right.
so now you can understand it. So then it's not that difficult to start to understand how to take auditions. It's just a matter of having that instruction in the first place.
Yeah. No, and just quickly, I know we didn't really get to talk about this, but
Oh,
I
sure.
think just the fact that you chose and decided to go back to school so well
Mm,
into your career, I think speaks volumes of just your character and
mm,
your willingness and commitment to continue to get better. Because I feel like 99% of people in your position would have completely been fine with where you're at,
mm,
because you're obviously doing really well. And
mm,
like, and the fact that you were not to say that you had to, humble yourself or anything like that, but the fact that you
mm.
still, because I mean, I'm sure it was definitely a change to go back to school when you've already
Yeah.
developed a professional life. And so I think that should that should speak volumes as to who you are as a person, and hopefully
Mm,
serve as an encouragement to other musicians that you should
mhm.
never feel like you're content with where you're at in life. So yeah,
No.
thank you for showing
And
that. Yeah.
yeah, and honestly, it kind of goes back to what we were saying before about like the quote about like if you feel like you know everything, you know nothing kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like especially at IU, Eric was amazing at like treading that fine line. Like technically, I am a professional and I
Right.
have um, way more experience with the orchestral world than
Mhm.
everybody around me in the
Right.
studio.
Right.
And so a lot of it was, he would sometimes, if people are playing a mock, instead of him getting his opinion out first,
Yeah.
about like this is what you need to do, he would defer
Yeah.
to me. He would encourage them to play for me as well.
Right. Right.
Whereas he understood, because I made it clear when I first started studying for the masters that I
Mhm.
didn't want. I honestly would prefer to be much more incognito, to the point where like there was a
Mm.
funny story about we were playing on Zoom for a sectional,
Mhm.
and I remember like we had Professor De Pasquale, we had Georgia Fazandis,
Mhm.
and Alex Carr as our three kind of sectional coaches. And the way that they structured it during COVID was um, mainly grade levels in terms of
Mhm.
orchestra. So the only
Right.
time that I could do with my schedule was the freshman sophomore orchestra.
Right.
Then obviously they put me principal, and we were all masked up, so it was hard to recognize people even that I had met before.
Right.
And so Alex, the way they did it, we were in a room,
Mhm.
all masked up distance, and then there was like one of those 360-degree Insta cameras that was linked up to Zoom, so Alex
Mhm.
could like see everybody and see
Right.
everything. And
Right.
we were playing Tchaikovsky Souvenir for String, or not, no,
Yeah.
Tchaikovsky Serenade,
Mhm.
and it was just not really holding together. I was trying my
Mhm.
best to like show the
Mhm.
beats to the concertmaster where to go,
Mhm.
all that fun stuff.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think Alex got a little bit annoyed at the lack of preparation from the orchestra.
Mhm.
And so he's just going on this tangent about like, why are we even doing this kind of thing? Then he paused and he looks down at the screen and is like, Austin, it's good to see you. What are you doing here? And I was like, hi. Because we had worked together at mainly Mozart too,
Right,
which is a professional festival in San Diego for usually principals and other title players.
right.
Um, and so we'd worked together professionally, and he just was like, ah, maybe. So he turned to the concertmaster and was just like, hey, maybe follow him because he sounds pretty good what he's doing. And she was like, oh, but that was kind of like what I was going for that before
Mhm.
Alex recognized me. That's what I was
Right,
going for, just like
right.
subtly help where I can, but I
Yeah,
don't want people to be making a big deal of it while I was in school because
yeah,
I wanted to be treated like everybody else because
yeah.
I was there to learn like everybody else.
Right,
Um,
right.
and there's nothing that really made me more special or better than anybody else. I feel
Mhm.
like people who think that they're inherently better than people,
Mhm.
I think that's kind of the first flaw or the first bad step down a bad road to go
Yeah,
down. Whereas like
yeah.
everybody who is in that studio, there was something that they did better than me, and I can learn
Mhm.
from them, kind of thing. And I think that's an inherent attitude that I try to develop, just because, um, again, going back to that, like there were times, obviously, I feel like I have my strengths,
Mhm.
but I want to learn from other people's strengths, and I want people to feel comfortable if they want to learn from my strengths, kind of thing.
Yeah,
So it's again, life is too short to feel like you're better than everybody.
yeah.
There,
That's
put that on
a
a t-shirt.
that's a great bumper sticker right there. So
Exactly. Exactly. Except
yeah.
when you're driving in Indiana, then I am better than driving the most amount of people in Indiana. Just because people in Indiana don't know how to drive.
Yeah,
That's not
I
because I'm better than them.
yeah. No, I totally having lived there 5 years, I totally
Yeah,
agree.
absolutely.
So Austin, this was so awesome and so eye-opening, and I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure the listeners will say the same.
Mm,
So before we wrap up quickly,
mm.
do you have any final imparting words of wisdom to the audience that may be pursuing a career in music in any way?
Sure. I guess the biggest one is make sure that you are confident that you want to go into music. And this, coming off of everything we are talking about, this might be a little bit of a downer, but music is not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy career to have. Um, it's one of those where it's kind of, again, an all or nothing thing. It's
Mhm.
very difficult, especially if you just have a music performance degree. If
Yeah,
you decide you don't want to do music performance, it's incredibly hard to do anything else until
yeah,
you get another degree in
right.
a different area. And so, a lot of it is just explore and find opportunities when you're, let's say, undergraduate in college. Try and find as many opportunities as possible to try out different areas of music. And if you find one that
Mhm.
just suddenly clicks,
Mhm.
or that you're like, oh, I could really enjoy this,
Mhm.
don't just go out and start taking orchestra auditions, for example.
Mhm.
Go to Aspen Music Festival, go
Mhm.
to NRO or
Mhm.
NOI or
Mhm.
Verbier, stuff
Right.
like that. And get to the level where, like, if, for example, I would say honestly for me, Verbier would be the pinnacle. Having gone there 1 year,
Mhm.
actually after I had already gotten the job, I went there 1 year and it was amazing and I loved it. And I felt like that was the highest level of orchestra playing that I've done in
Mhm.
a student pre-professional orchestra.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of that, if you don't enjoy that
Mhm.
and you're like, oh, I guess I'll go into orchestra because it's a safe job,
Mhm.
don't go into orchestra.
Yeah.
Orchestra is not, it's, there are plenty better jobs that you can put yourself into. Like orchestra also is not that stable either. We
Mhm.
have what are called CBAs,
Mhm.
which are renegotiated every 3 to 4 years. And if you're in a
Mhm.
vicious cycle about like trying new things and
Mhm.
pushing the needle from a management perspective, that might cost more money, but then it doesn't work out. You
Mhm.
lose money, then your budget gets cut again. So
Mhm.
it's one of those where it's not as stable as people would think. It's
Yeah.
still more stable than not having an orchestra job, but
Right.
it's if you're going into it just for the stability, there are other areas
Yeah.
for that. And so, but in that note, if you don't want to be in an orchestra, then just check that off your list.
Yeah.
Go explore chamber music festivals. Go study with as many teachers as possible.
Right.
Um, if you want to be a soloist, start practicing now because there's only room for like five cello soloists in
Yeah.
managerial ranks,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
Um, and so find what makes you special, what you're proud of, and lean into that as well.
Mhm.
Obviously, practice your scales, practice your popper and Grootsmacher,
Mhm.
but if you feel like you have a beautiful sound, develop that sound even further so that the
Mhm.
first thing that people say is, "Oh my God, I love your sound," or "I love your phrasing," or just
Right.
like the way that you really dug into that C string and
Mhm.
like had that. I mean, I keep going back to sound because that's something that I think about a lot, and I know a lot of my teachers have as well.
Mhm.
But find what makes you special and really lean into that. Make that an 11 out of 10 instead of everything else an 8 out of 10 kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So yeah,
That's great. Thank you so much again, Austin. I know how busy you are with everything, so it's been such an
absolutely.
honor and privilege for me to be able to spend time with you here today. So thank you so much again.
I appreciate it.
All
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
right, until next time.
Absolutely.